In this video, I'm going to take you through the Sunday morning PA operation. This is going to be very similar to what we'd do if you were shadowing someone on a Sunday morning and learning how to do the PA, but I'm going to record it and then you can refer back to it. There's quite a lot to cover, so there will probably be quite a long session, and I will split it into the different sections of the service as we would do on a Sunday morning. So broadly, there are 4 areas that we split this into. There's the preparation before everything else starts. Then we've got the practice time when the musicians are rehearsing and practicing. We've got what happens during the service, and then we've got the pack up and tidy away at the end. The very first thing to do, of course, is to make sure everything's switched on. Normally, if you're coming in to a 10 o'clock service, there will have been an 8 o'clock, and actually everything will be already turned on. If that isn't the case, you need to make sure that the PA desk itself is turned on. So there are 2 switches down just in front of the desk area labelled 1 and 2. So you turn on number 1, you wait about 10 seconds, and then you turn number 2. At the front of the church, there's the stage box that's plugged in at the front. On the left-hand side, there's a power socket there with a plug labelled PA on it. You just need to make sure that's turned on. Once you've done that, then you come to the desk, the desk will start up and you'll come to a screen like this. And this will allow you to select the user that you're going to come in as and start working with the desk. So as a member of the PA team, you will select PA team. So you choose them on there, tap login, and then you enter the password. Once you've typed in the password and tapped OK, you'll end up on this screen here. The first thing to do is to load up a scene that's already been pre-prepared that will probably do 90% of what you need in terms of setting up for the band on here. So to do that, you go to Scenes, this button below the screen here. You press that, and then you look on here, and there are some preset ones that we use. So the ones that you will typically want are probably one of these 4. As time goes on, this list may change, but we have basically a band set up for each of the band configurations, broadly speaking, so based on whoever's leading. So we've got one for Andrew, Jonathan, and one for Matt. There's also a scene if we don't have a band, if we're using pre-recorded. So let's choose one of those. You tap on the one you want. On the top right there, it says recall, and there's a go button. So you press go, and that will load the scene, and we'll set up the desk with all the faders that you're going to need for that session. Now, it might not be completely right, and what I'll do is I'll go through some of the things you can do to adjust that. But this should get you quite a long way towards what you need to do. So once we've done scenes, you'll now see along here, and I'll take you through briefly what's on here. We'll come back to the ones on the far left here. The green ones here, these are the band. So you've got your vocal mics, so we've got 3 vocal mics set up on here. You may not need all of them, but you've got 3. You've got a guitar, keyboard, in this case have a flute, and then we've got the 2 drum overhead mics, left and right. That's your band setup. Following from that, we've got a fader for the room mics. So this is what we have when we're doing streaming. We have the ability to feed the room, the congregation sound into that. The pink one, STR MTX, that's the output to the live stream, which I'll cover in more detail a bit later. And then we've got our other inputs that we use. So we've got a CD player, which lives underneath. We've got a cable on the desk that you can plug a phone or an iPod or something similar into. We've got the channels for the Mac Mini, labeled PC for historical reasons. And then we've got our radio mics. We have 2 handheld radio mics, one that's got a white tape on it, one that's got a red tape on it, and then we have 2 lapel radio mics, one of which I'm using to record this. There's a Tie 1 is the kind of older, more bulky one, and Tie 2 is the slightly newer, more slimline version. And those are the channels. So on the left, which I avoided earlier, these are, they're called DCAs. They are basically a way to group channels together. So what we have is all of the vocals for the band have a group fader. So that means you can mute them and change the level of all the vocals in one go. Same for the instruments in the band, and then for the drums. The final one of those 4 is a reverb channel for the vocals. This gives a bit of reverb effect on the band vocals, which can make things sound a bit nicer in the building and on the live stream. So that's your basic setup. Now, if you've got everything you need on a Sunday, that's great. You're pretty much up ready to go. Then you can go in to check the band is okay. If you're missing something, or you decide you don't want everything that's on there, you can adjust that. So what you do, if you want to change what these ones are, you go to Setup, you press the button there, you go to Surface, and then Strip Assign. This allows you to change everything that's on the surface here. It doesn't change what the desk is doing, but it does change what you see when you're looking at the faders on the desk. So along the top are all the ones that are available. So these are all the channels that you've got that you could use. So you can scroll through those. Along the bottom are the ones that are currently set up. So again, you can scroll through those. So if you look, those correspond to the ones I've got on the desk at the moment. So for instance, if I wasn't using Vox 3, I could take that off. I could just drag that out. But if instead I had a bass guitar, for instance, then I could go along the top, find the bass, and I could drag that in. And I've got bass. I could also rearrange them if I want to. So perhaps I want to put the bass over there. So that allows you to add and remove the channels, and we have a lot of them already preset on the desk. So that gives me quite a lot of control over that. You should find that the scene is pretty close. We've tried to make sure that the scene is fairly close to what you need. Once you've got the desk set up, the next thing to do is to make sure that the band have got everything they need to be able to start practicing. So while you've been doing this, the band will have arrived, they'll be setting up their instruments and plugging in. Then you need to check that you have up the front everything that you need to be able to run the service. We will generally have keyboard and 2 or 3 microphones already up there, and we usually have a DI box for the bass and for acoustic guitar. If you need more than that, then you will need to go and find the appropriate equipment. So most of the things you need will be in one of the drawers, which are under the desk. Here we have a filing cabinet with cables in it. We have a box with the microphones in it and microphone stands at the front and behind. I'm not going to go into trying to plug everything in during the video. It's too complicated to try and do through this. But should you need to do that, then you may need to get some help if it's the first time you've done it. Once you've plugged in and you've connected everything up, then you can then make sure again that your desk has got everything you need. If you've had to go through and add channels on and you're not sure what the right settings are, then I can take you through how you set those up. Let's do a little bit of the basic navigation through the desk so that you know what to look for. So on the screen, I've come off the scene and the setup that we were looking at before. The thing that you'll be looking at while you're setting up and trying to get the band ready to play and while they're rehearsing is in the processing section. On here, this gives you access to all of the channel processing, so that's equalization, the gain levels, things like compression and so on. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on all of those in this session. There are other videos that cover some of those, but we will go through the basics. So to check that you've got sound coming through, then you would go to processing. Then on the desk, you find the channel that you want to look at, and you press select. The little green SEL button. That will bring up on the screen the list of channels. It shows 8 channels with the one you've selected somewhere in the middle. And you can see there you've got the input channels that mimic what you've got on the desk on here. So that's the one I've got selected. It's a slightly different color. Then you can see here the different aspects of what's on this channel. So I will go through that. So from top to bottom, top is the preamp section. This is controlling the level that's coming into the desk. When you've got a musician playing, then you will see on this little meter, and you will see on the LEDs on here, you will see a level coming in. The way you control that is through this preamp knob on the top left of the screen. What you need is that when somebody's playing and they're playing at a decent volume, the sort of volume that they would typically be playing at, you want that little meter to be at the top of the green and into the yellow, ideally. You definitely don't want it in the red, and you don't want it too far down the green, otherwise you won't get enough. You need to leave a little bit of headroom, because sometimes they play louder and quieter, and you typically find that people generally play a little bit quieter during practice time. Down to the next section, we have what's called a high pass filter. That will already be set. We typically set that around about 100 hertz-ish for all the vocals. You don't set it on things like bass or keyboard, you don't need it for those, but on other channels we do set that. I'm not going to talk about gates today. The next one we're interested in is the equalization. So it's called a parametric EQ. It allows us to control the levels at different frequencies. You've got quite a lot of control over this. So you've got 4 bands, and the 4 bands are controlled by, you can see on here, a little graphic illustration of what's going on. You've got buttons on the right hand side which give you access to that. So for instance, I can go to the high frequency, I can then see that, I can change the frequency of that. If I adjust that, you can see that moving on there. I can change the level, so I can adjust that up and down. And this will either boost or cut the sound at that particular frequency. And we'll use that to help us get a good sound from this particular channel. And you've got 4 ways you can do that. So you've got 4 different bands, you can adjust that. When you load the scene, or you load a library setting, which I'll cover in a moment, this will already be preset, and you probably don't need to do a great deal, but it's there in case you feel there's a particular issue that you want to try and address. So that gives you access to that. All the channels also have a compressor, so this allows us to reduce the dynamic range, which is quite good for people who sing very loud or very soft, and it allows us to reduce that so that you don't hear that quite so much. Again, that will already be preloaded. All of the instruments and vocalists that need that have already been done. The only time we probably need to make any change to that is if we get somebody who's not actually sung as part of the band, for instance, in which case we would probably set them up new. If you've got somebody in your band that has come along and is not in your scene and you want to load them on, then there's a way to do that. So if we go back out to the channel list, so we can get to that at any point. If you tap on the screen, and you tap on that area again, you get back to your list. If you want to load a preset, then there are a number of those already defined. There's this button here that says library. So if I'm on the summary screen here with multiple channels and I go to library, I get an input channel library. And you go onto that, you make sure that it's on user rather than on factory. And we have already saved lots of library settings for our different channels that we use. So there's a reasonable chance that there will be something on there. So for instance, I've currently got the vocalist number 1. So let's say it's not Andrew singing this time, it was somebody else. So let's say, oh, it's Nick. Okay, we've got a preset for Nick. So I make sure I select Nick on there, hit recall, and that's now loaded his settings, which have been saved on here. So rather than having to work it all out from scratch each time, if you've got the musician already on there, you can load them on and that will use their settings. You still have the ability to go in and make adjustments in here if you think you need to do that, but hopefully it gives you a reasonably good starting point for that. That can be done for any of the channels that are on here. So if you've got a guitarist and it's different guitarists today, you could go back to this, go to the library and say, actually, yeah, it's Nick's playing his guitar, so we've got his settings, so I can recall that, and that will load that on. You can do the same on individual things, so you can do that, for instance, on just the EQ settings, but most of them we'd probably do it at the channel level. It works a little bit better that way. That will hopefully give you the ability now to get set up, and while the band is then practicing, you can then do any fine tuning. Unfortunately, because of the limited amount of time we have on a Sunday morning, we don't have time. We don't typically do a proper sound check. We only have time really to get things quickly set up and the band to practice, because they only have around about half an hour once they've set up to actually practice the songs for the service. So you will find that you will need to do gain adjustments very quickly at the beginning to get the right levels if you need to. Make sure the band is then able to get up and running. Make sure your channels are all set up. And at that point, you're starting to get into the next section, which is the practice time. I've given you a very quick tour through the layout of the desk now and what you do in the first part of the service. Hopefully, at this point, you've now got things set up in approximately the way you want them, in terms of you've got channels set up, you've got mics set up, and you've got the band ready to start practicing. As they start to practice, then you will do your tuning, and there are a couple of things you need to do in order to get this to work well. You need to make sure that the gain is set first. That's the key thing you need to do first, because you don't really want to be changing the gain levels once the musicians have been doing very much and once you're into the service, definitely. So the first thing is go through each channel, make sure that the gain is at a decent level. As I said before, have a look on here, listen to it, have a look on the meters, make sure that it's at top of the green is the yellow when they're playing loudly. Go through that and make sure you do that on each vocalist and each instrument. Ideally, if there was time, you would do that through a sound check, but we don't have the luxury of that on a Sunday morning, so we would probably be doing that whilst they're starting to practice. Once you've done the gain, the next thing to do is get the monitor mix right for the musicians, because that will enable them to carry on practicing. So the monitor mix, we haven't touched anything on the right hand side yet, so we're now going to look at that. The monitor mix is controlled by these these buttons on the right hand side here. At the moment, the faders that we haven't touched are actually controlling what you hear in the main speakers, what we call front of house. So anything that you hear is coming out of the main speakers is controlled by these faders. On the right hand side, you can see this label that says Mix Select. At the moment, the one LR is lit up. LR is the main left and right front of house speaker. Normally, that's the one you would want to have lit up, because you would want to be changing that. To look at the foldback, so each area on the stage, there is a foldback speaker. So we have 4. They are left to right, 1, 2, and 3, and then number 4 is the drummer. On here, they are actually labelled as that. So left is from your point of view, from standing here, is the leftmost vocalist. Centre is the centre vocalist, stroke guitarist, and right keys is on the right there. Drums are at the back. And to change the mix for the foldback, you just press that button. That is now meaning you are now changing the foldback mix, not the front of house mix. So once you've got the gain right, you would then want to make sure that the musicians can hear what they need to hear. And you do that by asking them. So you need, again, because the scene has already been saved, it's probably not going to be a long way off what you want, because we've set something up that's a reasonable mix. But you would then want to make sure, starting with the worship leader, can they hear what they need to hear? And if they need to make changes, you go to their mix. So for instance, if the lead musician is playing guitar, so it's in the middle, you do centre first. Can they hear what they need to hear? If they need to hear more, you can adjust on the faders here how much they can hear of each vocalist or each instrument. You do the same with the keyboard player if there's a keyboard, same with vocal 1, and then same with the drum if you've got a drummer. Once they've got the levels right, let them practice for a bit longer, probably go back and check again a little bit later, is it still all okay? Things will change over the course of practice as they play louder and quieter songs as well. You can also do that through the iPad. So we have an iPad which is in the drawer that has an app on it which gives you the same control for the desk. I'm not going to cover that in this session. I did a different session on iPad, and we can cover that separately if we need to. But that would allow you to take the iPad, walk down to the front, chat to the musicians, and make changes to it whilst you're down there, rather than having to come backwards and forwards or having to talk loudly from the back. Either way is possible, it's just your preference on how you want to do it. Once you've got the gain and then the monitor mix at a decent state, then you can then concentrate on any adjustments you want to make in the room. So make sure that you're back on LR, because you want to hear what's coming out in front of house. You can then go through each channel, and if you want to make changes to the equalization, you can go through each of those. You can listen on headphones, so I have my headphones plugged in here. If you want to hear a particular channel on headphones, then you just press this PAFL button. So for instance, if I want to hear the guitar, if you press that on the headphones, it'll just listen to the guitar. It also has pre-selected it on here, so you can see it on the screen. You can do the same with the vocalists and so on. If you take that off, then it'll go back to what the main mix is. You can also, if you want to, listen to all the vocals by doing it on the vocals DCA or the band and the drums. So you can listen to those. If you want to fine-tune things, you can do that. It's actually better in many ways to just to hear what's happening here. I will quite often walk out along the back of the church and have a listen, because this is not the most optimal position for listening to the sound. Actually better off quite often standing out there. Again, if you want, you can take the iPad out and you can make adjustments using that. Or you can just walk out, have a listen, and then come back and make some adjustments. All of that you can do whilst the musicians are practicing, also being aware that you may need to make changes to their monitor mixes as time goes on, but also just listening to what's happening. Once you've got all the basics now set up, the band is practicing, you've got things roughly how you want them, you've got some EQ, you've got a rough set of mixes done, you need to just make sure that you can hear everything and you can hear it in the right sort of order. The main thing you want to hear is the vocals. You want to hear what the words that people are singing. The thing you want to hear the most is the lead. So you want to hear the worship leader's vocals the most. That's the thing that you should hear above everything else. Not that they drown everything else out, but you need to make sure they are loud, clear, and intelligible. You then want to make sure you can hear the other vocalists and the lead instrument. So if your worship leader is a guitarist and singing, you want to hear their vocals and their guitar. Then you want to hear the other vocals that are coming through, just a little bit behind the lead, and any other instruments. That's kind of an approximate kind of priority that you want, because ultimately what we're doing is we're leading the congregation in worship, so they need to be able to hear the words clearly so they can follow. The other thing that you want to do during this time, of course, is to make sure that everything else you need for the service is ready. So at this point, you'll need to check that your handheld and lapel mics are okay, make sure the batteries are fine, make sure you get them out, make sure they're plugged in and that they work. I would also be checking with whoever's leading the service and speaking what microphones they need. Do they want the handhelds? Typically we put both handhelds out. And then do they need one or two lapel mics? If it's Josh leading the service, then he'll want the headset. Other people speaking will want a lapel mic. That's what you need to be doing whilst the band is practicing and when you're not actually making adjustments to the mix in that process. So that by the time it gets towards near the beginning of the service, you are ready and you've got everything you need set up and you know that everything's working correctly. Everything I've talked about so far, of course, has been in the church. The other thing we now have to take account of course, is that we are live streaming our service every Sunday. Mentioned it briefly as we went through the desk setup. So we have a couple of things that are obvious on here that are to do with live streaming. First is the room mics. As I said earlier, these basically pick up the sound of the congregation. You can listen to those at any point. There are two microphones placed at the front of the church. You can see them, one to the left and one to the right of the stage. You should be able to see them pointing back towards the congregation. You can listen to those on the headphones if you want to check them. The other thing you want to do as well is listen to the audio that's going to go to the stream. So at any point you can do that. As we did with the other channels, you can listen to that on your headphones by using PAFL, and I would recommend you do that during the rehearsal and during the service. It is good to be able to listen to what's going out. It's not exactly the same. I've done videos which explain how that is done. I won't go into that today. But we do some additional processing on the sound that goes to the stream. The way that you can check that is by using that channel. That's the only thing you should do. You should never mute that because that's the live stream. We don't need to mute it. It is there so that you can, at any point during practice and during the service, you can have a listen and make sure that what sound is going out to the live stream is good. During the rehearsal time, I would use that to have a listen and again to compare that to what I'm hearing in here to make sure that the sound is okay. If you have a drummer, then the drum overheads only go out to the live stream. They don't get fed into the speaker in church because the drum sound is sufficient in here that you don't need it. But you would want to listen at some point during the rehearsal to check that, can I hear the vocalists, can I hear the instruments, and can I hear the drums, and is it clear, and is the balance about right? The mix that goes to the live stream will be driven by what you're doing on here. So if you make adjustments on these faders for the main front of house sound, that will affect the stream, but there are also some additional processes that are done on that as well. So very quickly to cover that, if you listen to that and you think, oh, the instruments are a little bit overwhelming the vocals, it sounds okay in church, so I don't want to adjust this mix, but I'd like to maybe drop the level of the instruments compared to the vocalist, you can do that. The way you do that is you go to layer B. So we've not touched layers at all. At the moment, everything we're doing in church is on layer A. So you can see the layer buttons here. A is lit up. If I press B, then the faders all change and we now have a completely different setup. Most of these I'm not going to cover in here. The three that you're interested in are these three here: Vox, STR band, and STR drum. These are basically the combined vocalists, instruments and drums that get sent to our live stream. So you need to select layer B, which I've done. On the right hand side, there on near where the fallback mixes are, there's one button, number 6 is labelled STR group. You need to select that, and that is the mix of those channels that get sent to the live stream. So when I pressed it, these three adjusted, and you can see that the vocal level is a little bit higher than the band level, and the drum level is similar. Those three you can make adjustments to if you feel that the volume that's going to the live stream needs a slight adjustments in the balance. That's the only thing you can really do on that. But make sure when you've done that, when you're finished, you go back to layer A and you go back to LR, so you don't end up getting confused because adjustments you make aren't being heard in the church. By this point, everything should be up and running. The band is practicing, they're all happy. You've got your monitor mix ready, you've got your sound in the church okay, you've had a listen to your stream and everything is okay. You've had time to make adjustments. You should have got your microphones ready that you need for the service, checked what needs to be going on, put out the handheld and the radio mics. Give the lapel mic to whoever's going to be preaching, put the handheld at the front, put one on the stand if you need to, make sure they're all up and ready. When the band is finished, it's very important then to make sure you've muted everything. At 9:45, we start our live stream, and it's important then that you don't hear anything that's in church, so you need to make sure that you've muted everything. You can mute every channel individually on here with these mute buttons, or you can do it on the DCA. So if I take those off, all those channels are now live. I could hear if somebody was on them. You can mute each individual channel by doing that. So mute lit up is muted, counterintuitive, but that's how it is. So you can do that on each individual channel. So you would do that at the end of the practice. You can also mute whole groups of them using the DCA. So if I mute the vocals, you'll see that the two vocal channels are flashing because they're muted through that. If I mute the band, then those are flash. If I mute drums, those are. It's very important that you make sure you mute everything before 9:45 so that when we start our live stream, we don't pick up any sounds from in the church. So when we start the live stream, there'll be music coming from the computer. That will come through on this PC channel, and you will then, you want to hear that a little bit in church, but it's important that the only thing that they hear on the live stream is the sound from the computer. It's from the video that's coming through. So we mute everything else, and then we know we're okay. And then we're ready to start the service. When the service starts, it then moves into you watching and listening to what's going on at the front. The main thing you need to do is just be aware of what is happening at the front. So if somebody's leading, then you need to make sure that their microphone is on. When the band starts playing, you need to make sure the band is on. Other points during the service, if those microphones are not being used, it's best to keep them muted so that you don't, other noises don't affect what's being heard, both here and on the live stream. So if somebody comes up to speak, the service leader will come up to speak at the beginning. You make sure that the fader is up, you unmute the channel, you get the volume so that they can be heard clearly. Again, you've got access to EQ on there if you need to make adjustments. There are library settings for some of those as well, if necessary, and you can listen on headphones if you need to make adjustments. When they finish speaking and they're going to put the microphone down, make sure you mute it so that they don't hear the bang of the microphone being put down if they put it down somewhere. And be aware of who is saying what and when so that you can make sure you have the right one on or off. If we're having communion, for instance, then they will typically use either the headset or the lapel mic, and whoever's leading or speaking may switch between different microphones. So you just need to be aware of what's going on so that you've got the right ones on and off. If the band starts to play during a ministry time, then you may have somebody speaking at the front and leading leading a ministry time and the band playing at the same time, but perhaps a little bit quieter than normal. So you want to make sure the band is unmuted, but possibly bring the levels down a little bit so that it's not competing with whoever's speaking. Also, I quite often find that if you just had quite a loud song and then somebody steps up to speak, you may need to bring up their volume a little bit, more than you would have done previously, just so that they can be heard clearly when everybody's just been listening to a loud, participating in a loud worship song. So things like that that you need to be aware of. You may also find that as the service progresses and as we do different things, that you might be adjusting the mix. So we have, if we have 3 or 4 or more worship songs during the service, and they are of different styles and different mixes, you may actually need to make adjustments on here. So don't assume that because you did it all at the beginning that it's going to stay exactly the same all the way through. Be aware of what's going on and be making changes as you need to. Similarly with the live stream, have a listen to that from time to time. Make sure you can hear what you want to hear, that the mix is still sounding okay, that it sounds clear and intelligible, that you hear in that all the instruments and whoever's speaking. The room mics will be used from time to time, so we typically use those during spoken parts of the service. Because they pick up everything, they will pick up any noise in the church. That adds a quality to the stream, which means that people feel more involved. So we've put those in so that you can hear people clapping, laughing, responding to things during the service. So if somebody's at the front speaking and there is a possibility that the congregation will respond in some way, it's worth having those room mics on. So that would be any point during the introduction, even during announcements, but also particularly during the sermon. If we have, when we say the Lord's Prayer, for instance, you want people on the stream to be able to hear that. So I would have that room mic unmuted. While the band is playing at the moment, best to have it muted, because the sound from the band coming from the speakers in the church, it's not that great a sound coming through those, so I would typically have that muted anytime the band is playing. It's a bit of judgment call when you do or don't have it on, but it definitely does add something to the live stream to have that in. The other thing to be aware of that we do sometimes, less at the moment because of COVID restrictions, but we do have, is that you may find you have different people using the handheld mics. We try to not do that so much at the moment, and it's less of an issue. But if you do, just be prepared that if you have somebody speaking using the handheld mic, not everybody has the same mic technique, not everybody holds it close. Some people hold it close, some hold it far away, some are soft-spoken, some are loud. You may well, and it's quite likely you will need to make adjustments on the handhelds when that happens. If you've got it all set up nicely because the service leader is using it, and then you end up finding somebody else has switched to it, be prepared that you may even have to change the gain at that point. We tend to try and avoid changing gain on things during the service. That's the one exception. If you've got somebody who's very quiet, you may need to adjust that and make so that they can be clearly heard. But then you need to be on the ball, and if people are switching mics, then you may need to be hanging on that so that you can make adjustments back again, so that it doesn't then clip it when somebody else comes back and starts speaking loudly again. Finally, once the service is over, then we need to clear up. It's pretty much the reverse of what we did at the beginning. You need to make sure you collect back the handheld mics, the lapel mics, check the batteries on them. I didn't say at the beginning, but I would also recommend check the batteries on them at the beginning. If the battery looks okay, great. If not, replace them. We use rechargeable batteries for most things. And if the level looks a bit low when you're starting, then I would replace it at the beginning, but I would also check them at the end and make sure that when you put them away, they've got a reasonable battery level. The microphones are used for other services, and not everybody else thinks to check, so I think it's a good thing if we can do that. Make sure they come back, make sure you've turned them off, and make sure that they're all put away nicely into the drawer and carefully. If you've got additional equipment out for the band, so if you set up an extra microphone or if you put out an extra DI box, if it's not in the way, then fine, but you may want to put that away afterwards to make space, to make sure everything's put away. If you made changes to the scene and you want to keep those, you've got a couple of options. On the scenes, you could overwrite the original. So if you believe that what you've done is applicable to the next time and you want to keep that, you could overwrite the scene that you loaded at the beginning. If you're not sure and you want to keep it anyway, then you could actually save that as another scene. So you can just move down here and save it as a different one, just press store and do that. And that will save it for another time, and then we can decide to use it or not. If you make changes to scenes and you save them and you want them kept, you need to let me know, because I regularly take copies and backups and make changes to the scenes offline. And if you want to keep yours, best to let me know so that we don't lose it when I come back another time. Once you've done that and you're finished, you just need to turn everything off. If it's all packed away, it's the switches on the side, turn them off in the reverse order. Number 2, wait a few seconds, then number 1, make sure the stage box is turned off at the front, and put the dust cover back on the desk when you're finished, and that's it, we're all packed away and good to go. I realise I've covered a lot of material in this session, and there may be things that I've not completely covered in as much detail as I would like to. I have done a number of other sessions going into more specifics on different areas. What I wanted to do with this one was go through everything start to finish in enough detail that will hopefully remind you, having been through it. It's not a substitute for having been here and done it, obviously, but it will hopefully give you a good reminder of everything that you need to do. And if there are other things that need looking at, we'll do that in a future session.